Hello, class. This is part two of our uh, video lecture on uh, prehistory to the birth of civilization. We left off last time with the Neolithic period, the major cultural achievements of human beings during the Neolithic period included the development of agriculture, the development of towns, and then lastly, megaliths, an example of which might be Stonehenge, all of which I talked about at the end of part one. Um, Around 6,000 years ago, human history entered a new phase. Gradual improvements in agriculture allowed Neolithic farmers to begin producing large surpluses of grain and other food crops. And this in turn allowed towns to grow in size and population density until some became large cities that developed sophisticated trade and political relationships with each other. Labor specialization ensued. Agriculture plus sedentary populations eventually leads to the development of labor specialization because agriculture allows each farm family to produce more than what they can eat for themselves. So some people no longer had to survive by growing their food. They could earn a living through other occupations, including warriors, chieftains, shamans, or medicine men, craftsmen who made such things as tools, blankets, pottery, weapons, etc. So you get labor specialization. Um, as more and more people began making a living through pursuits other than agriculture, they also began sharing information and ideas about the work that they did, which led to labor saving technologies like boats, irrigation canals, and perhaps most significantly, the wheel. Now, we think of wheels today as being a means of transportation, but in point of fact, the first wheels were used to make pottery, including pots, jars, and other vessels. Around 3500 BCE in Mesopotamia. A few hundred years later, wheeled carts and chariots began appearing around the same area. Ancient Greeks invented the first wheelbarrow somewhere around the 6th to the 4th centuries BCE. The earliest known boat is the Pessie canoe found at an excavation site in the Netherlands, made from a hollowed out tree trunk. It dates to somewhere around 8000 BCE. The use of artificial irrigation systems, including reservoirs and canals, probably began at roughly the same time in the Nile and Indus River valleys around 3000 BCE. Then we get to metallurgy. Metallurgy is defined as the practice of using heat to extract metal from ore, which is what you dig out of the ground, fashioning it into desirable forms and shapes. This practice probably began in Asia Minor, i.e., Turkey, around 4000 BCE. From there, it spread far and wide. Eventually, metal would replace stone and bone as the primary materials for making tools and weapons. The first two metals mined in large quantities were copper and tin, which combined to make an alloy called bronze, which is vastly superior to stone or bone in strength, durability, and flexibility. It led to a period that many scholars call the Bronze Age, which in the Middle East and Asia lasted from around 3300 BCE to around 1200 BCE. It started and ended later in Europe. Transition to bronze also facilitated the development of trade networks. Since copper and tin are seldom found in the same place, people hoping to make bronze often had to travel long distances uh, to get one or the other. Um, There's a great video which is embedded in PowerPoints that I encourage you to watch, which describes the lost wax method of bronze casting. I'm not going to play it here because we don't have time in this video, but I urge you to watch it on your own, and you will have access to the video through the PowerPoints for this lecture. Um, Eventually, the Bronze Age would give way to the Iron Age, which began around 1200 to about 600 BCE, depending on the region. Ancient peoples initially considered iron an inferior metal to bronze because it wasn't as hard or as durable as bronze, even though it was much more common than either copper or tin. But around 1800 BCE, the Hittites in Anatolia, i.e., Turkey, figured out how to heat iron with carbon in order to produce something called steel, which is stronger and more flexible than bronze. Steel eventually became the foundation of the Hittite Empire, which controlled much of modern day Turkey and Syria by about 1300 BCE. Perhaps the most significant development of this period, however, was the evolution of writing. As early as 8000 BCE, clay tokens were being used by people in Mesopotamia and surrounding areas to depict units of goods for accounting purposes. Then around 3100 BCE, people in the region began using two-dimensional pictographs, i.e. pictorial symbols representing people, places, or things, instead of tokens, to record their commercial transactions. After about 3000 BC, the Sumerians of Mesopotamia developed a type of script called cuneiform, which combined pictographs with phonograms, symbols representing sounds, in order to convey more complicated thoughts and ideas. So pictographs, again, represent people, places, or things. Phonograms represent sounds. And cuneiform used both in order to communicate to the reader. Um, and we consider cuneiform to be the first true writing system in human history. Some of the earliest works of literature, like the Atrahasis, which contains a flood narrative, also the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is an ancient hero story, were written in cuneiform. A related form of writing, called hieroglyphics, emerges at almost the same time in Egypt around the late 4th millennium BCE. Hieroglyphic writing utilizes pictographic symbols that can represent either objects or, more often, sounds, depending on the context. Hieroglyphs were an incredibly elaborate form of writing that was used almost exclusively for formal inscriptions on royal tombs, monuments, and temples. But eventually, the Egyptians developed two other simpler forms of writing called hieratic and demotic that were much more suitable for everyday communications. Now, as ancient peoples developed writing, they also developed the ability to record and transmit their myths to future generations through the written word. Now, that term myth is freighted with a lot of significance, but also a lot of misunderstanding. In everyday speech, we use the term myth to denote a popular fiction that is widely believed or accepted as true. But historians, anthropologists, folklorists, and other academics who study myths for a living, they have another definition. These scholars use the term myth to refer to a traditional story, often concerning some legendary hero or event from the early history of a nation or people group, that expresses the deeply held values or beliefs of that particular group of people. Myth making had probably been going on for thousands of years before the development of writing, but after the development of writing, it kicked into high gear because now myths could be transmitted, shared, revised, or reinvented by multiple groups of people. Calling a story a myth, therefore, does not necessarily imply that it is untrue, but only that it functions as a myth within a certain people group. In other words, again, it conveys the deeply held values, attitudes, or beliefs of that particular people group. Great example that I often like to end on is the story of the Alamo, which is near and dear to the hearts of many Texans. A lot of my students end up being from Texas. The story of the Alamo is basically a true story. Around 200 Texan rebels did hold off an army of around 5,000 Mexican troops for about 2 weeks before eventually the mission fortress of the Alamo near San Antonio was stormed and all of the defenders were put to the sword. That's a true narrative. That's something that actually did happen. What makes it a myth, however, is the way the story is used to convey the deeply held beliefs of Texans that they are a special and unique people, that their independence and their stubbornness and their courage are a part of are a legacy of their unique state history. And the Alamo is used to convey that belief, or the story of the Alamo is used to convey that belief. All right, so that's it for um, Birth of Civilization Part 2. See you all next time.